All right, guys, I'm going to try to rip through this pretty quick to make it a short video, but this video is about a case study I just had on a 2003 Honda Pilot. There was a random misfire code, and what's really unique about the 2003 Honda Pilot is it uses the J35A4 engine, which only has one oxygen sensor for an upstream oxygen sensor, despite the fact that it's a six-cylinder engine. So there's only technically one bank. And that makes misfire diagnostics a little more complicated. And I do believe that because it only has one oxygen sensor, its fuel trims do not report accurately on a single cylinder misfire. And I'll get into why that's the case. So I start off with a random misfire code, and I don't believe that. There's no misfire counter in the scan tool. I was using an Autel MX808 since I'm just a DIY guy. And I wanted to verify truly which cylinder was misfiring because it didn't. It would be really weird if it was random. Well, I guess not weird, but it would change my diagnostic process. So what I did was I took a pulse sensor and I plugged it into the exhaust. And what we're replicating here in this test is basically the dollar bill trick. Remember back in the day, you'd put a dollar bill up to the exhaust pipe, and then anytime it got sucked in, you'd say, "Oh yeah, it's misfiring." The difference is when you do it with a pulse sensor, you have real data, and you can tell which cylinder it is. So I have several waveforms here where as this goes on, the pulse sensor grabs those anomalies in exhaust pulses. So what's unique about a pulse sensor versus a pressure sensor is a pulse sensor only senses differentials in pressure. So anytime there's a negative pressure or a negative pressure difference, not necessarily a negative pressure, it'll drop down, and then on any type of pressure difference that is positive, it'll shoot up. Now, because it does a difference in pressure on a misfire, there will always be a negative followed by a very strong increase in positive pressure because the next one's going to be a normal hump. So despite the fact that this goes up, it's effectively not valid. The first change in pressure is the one we care about. So the spot where that dollar bill is going to get sucked in will produce these spikes. And we see this spike rather consistently in this waveform. I have an ignition cylinder sync on cylinder 4. And you can just see it kind of always shows up at about this, just before the spark line. So I wanted to identify which cylinder this was. So I had wrote a program and posted this on my channel before about a piston overlay software. I made this software myself. If you're interested in downloading it, I have a video on my channel, and I always upgrade to the latest version on the download. Right now it's on version 0.0.2. But anyway, you go in here and you input your cylinders, so 6 cylinders. You put in your firing order. In this case, I'll start this from scratch because I won't. It's just typing in stuff. You select 6, you put in your firing order 1, 4, 2, 5, 3, 6. You put in your ignition cylinder sync, which was 4 in this case, and then it generates this. And this map shows you what we're on. So power, exhaust, intake, compression. So every 4-stroke engine is going to have this. So then you just take this and you drop the opacity down, and you clean this up by dropping this to make it a little bit easier to read. And you just zoom in. And you see, well, which one here is it on the exhaust? Which exhaust pulse is missing, causing this negative change in the waveform. So you just line this up, and you line this up. And then what I like to do is I like to make it a little longer, and then I like to drop it down until I see the exhaust fall into that middle. So here it is, where the exhaust in the middle is cylinder 5. That pulse drops down. And let's just verify. Let's go over to another one. Looks like right here it didn't do it as much, but it did do it a little. And you can see in this one, it doesn't really look like it's easy to tell. Like maybe that's 5 at the end. But let's go to another one here. That's a little more prominent, and we can see it's 5 again. And let's even go ahead and hit over one more. Let's look at another. And here we are, 5 again. So at this point, I know it's not a random misfire. I know it's a cylinder 5 misfire. So we just saved ourselves a bunch of time. We're going to go really focus on cylinder 5. Now, one thing again that I'm going to repeat that is really interesting about the J35A4 engine for Honda this year is it only has one bank. So fuel trims do not seem to respond well to misfires on a particular cylinder. Because whenever I would see fuel trims that don't change on a misfire, I'm going to think it's an ignition problem. And maybe I could be wrong on that thinking, but that's just the thing that I've observed before. But I'm not seeing any fuel trim differences, so I swapped the coil on plugs, swap the spark plugs, and I know that's not going to fix it because I literally just did the coil on plugs on this car. I just did the spark plugs on this car prior to any of this, just because it's a 250,000 mile engine that I've been restoring back to normal for my brother as a gift. So I had driven the car actually for about a month or so before the misfire showed up. And I thought maybe I just installed something wrong or one of the boots was wearing out already or something. But I still swapped the ignition system between cylinder 4 and 5 just to see, and nothing changed. So I knew I had to get fancy at this point, and I was going to do an in-cylinder pressure analysis because I was worried about maybe a compression issue. The J35 doesn't have a clear flood mode, so I disable fuel and I do a relative crank, and I can just hear the thing is fine. And I don't have the waveform pulled up, but I did do a relative compression check and it was fine. Now it doesn't necessarily mean it's not a compression issue, but at this point I'm developing some relief because I'm thinking, oh, this motor's not toast. You know, this is a gift for my brother. I really want to get him this car. So because it's kind of simple and easy enough to get to these fuel injectors, I go ahead and do it. I back probe injectors 4, 5, and 6, and I'll show you that waveform here. And right away we see something interesting. Those of you familiar with fuel injector waveforms, I'll show you a known good here. So this is going to be cylinder 5, or it's 4, 5, 6, and then the amp clamp. I found that the amp clamp was pretty unreliable, but fortunately it didn't really matter in this scenario because I was able to get everything I needed from the voltage waveform. But anyway, we can see here it turns on, stays on, fuel injector effectively opens, and then this pintle moves right here. So there's a Zener diode clipping. So this just looks textbook, right? Like nothing looks crazy about this. So then let's go on to cylinder 5 and look at that waveform. And here it is. I'll draw another cursor over. And we can see right away we got some weirdness with this pintle movement. This pintle hump is doing something interesting. Now, I don't necessarily know what this pintle hump is doing. I don't know if this is snapping closed too hard or staying open longer, because the open time, when I draw it, I won't even waste the time, but it's close. But this pintle movement here is super interesting. And then just to make sure I'm not insane, I look at another one, and again, this looks textbook. So some more background that probably doesn't matter is that OEM parts are always better. So I look at the price of OEM fuel injectors, and they're just insane. I mean, this is a gift from my brother that was supposed to be cheap in the first place, and it's already racked up more repairs than it needed. So I opt to actually get Standard Motor Products injectors. They're basically half the price. I want to do all 6 cylinders because it's got 250,000 miles. I just want this car to be right. I'm going to drive it 36 hours back east to my brother. I want to make sure it's a good running car for me on the way. So I swap out the injectors, I pop in new ones, and let's look at 3 known goods here. And a big reason I also chose to do Standard Motor Products, like all at once, all the same injector, I didn't want different brands in this car. I mean, God forbid I can't get to my brother to work on the car if it ever has any issues, but I don't want different brands looking a little bit different in the waveforms. So whoever's working on it, it's going to be easier if it's all the same brand, so there's less anomalies. But let's look again here at the cylinder. A nice little pintle hump. Let's look at this one. A nice little pintle hump, nothing crazy. And then one more time, a nice little pintle hump. So at this point, it's a confirmed fix. Just purely looking at voltage waveforms, non-intrusive, lack of fuel trim data, really bad scan tool data. I still came to the proper diagnosis on the first try. Something that really drives me nuts And why I got into this whole mess is that people just replace parts, and it just drives me up a wall. It's wasteful, it's expensive, and it's the only reason I really got into working on cars myself was because I just could not stand going to a corporate shop, specifically in Vegas areas, where nobody really diagnosed anything. So like most things in life, if you want it done right, you somehow have to do it yourself. And I know it's not practical for everybody to go out there and spend thousands of dollars on tools and stuff. But if you're fanatical enough, you'll get really into this. You'll write your own programs to identify cylinders, and you'll start fixing cars. But I don't know. That's neither here nor there. I just thought that this would be an interesting case study to share to anybody who watches it. So thanks for tuning in, and have a good day.